Okay, so welcome everyone to this evening. Thank you for attending to this launch event, actually, of what's we've termed the Queen Square Clinical Trials Centre. Just to highlight, this is the beginning of a journey to try and maximally support trials activity at Queen Square, which is rapidly increasing. I want to particularly thank Karl for coming this evening, the Director of the BRC and the Director of Research for everything, the NHS, the Trust, and also to thank Nick McNally, who's the Managing Director of Research for the Director, for coming this evening, and their input is going to be extremely important for the process going forward. So I'm just going to make a few introductory remarks and then hand over to colleagues. What's really, really important, and it's the only way we're going to make trials happen in a really effective, consistent, resilient way, is to work in partnership. And so this is genuinely a serious attempt to partner with between UCL, UCLH, the BRC and the JRO. So this is really, really important that we recognise and continue to work in a close partnership. So from the Institute's perspective, obviously we're in the business of trying to deeply understand how the brain works at all scales. And then wherever possible, we're in the business of trying to translate that into prevention, diagnostics, and of course therapies. And many of you in this room are involved in all those different aspects. And of course that means we need to be set up to do trials, both first-in-man trials as well as later phase trials. The Institute has grown rapidly in the last 10 years, and we've now got actually nearly £400 million in active grants, which actually is 1/3 of the whole of UCL Neuroscience. And our staff numbers have increased, and so we have a large number of excellent PIs, many of them in this room, with their teams, delivering research, much of which we're trying to translate into benefit for patients, including clinical trials. We have 8 departments, the PIs across major disease areas, and in many departments there is bidirectional translational research going on, going from the patient back to the lab bench and back in the other direction. And of course, it's increasingly the case that we now are moving to do trials. The first step in that direction was about more than 10 years ago now, when Nick Fox led a bid to the Wolfson Foundation that was successful for £20 million. And a key part of that was the establishment of the Wolfson Experimental Neurology Centre, led by Vincenzo. That's been extremely successful as a first-in-man early phase trial unit, and many landmark studies have happened. For example, antisense trials intrathecally in Huntington's and many others. And so this is our first kind of step, I suppose, in the last 10 years towards being a trials active centre at Queen Square and the Institute. That wasn't really the case prior. Well, it wasn't as much the case prior to this unit, which has been very successful. It's now part of the CRF of UCLH. The other thing that's happened that's quite dramatic in the last 5 to 10 years, and many of you in this room are involved, is all sorts of interesting genetic therapies are being developed. We have a very strong track record in human genetics, in neurogenetics, but now there's all sorts of opportunities with ASO, RNA therapies, gene editing, AAV, to impact different, both single gene and sporadic neurological diseases, with many colleagues at the Institute at the forefront of this. And so this is something where we need further trials capability. So although the London Wolfson's been very successful, I think it was about 2021, Mary will correct me, it was increasingly apparent that as PIs were getting more and more approaches to do trials, we were not that well set up, particularly for later phase trials. And there was a report done by, I think, Mary and Rob Brownstone, the divisions of neurology and neurosurgery, that highlighted some of these gaps in our sort of ability to respond, and we were turning away trials and things which wasn't what we wanted. We're quite opportunistic, and there was an opportunity to try and get some money in 2023, and we managed to get some money from what was called the UCL UCLH Strategic Fund. And this money has been used partly to try and start to address this gap that was identified. And that's what we're going to describe to you this evening, the Queen Square Clinical Trials Centre. But I would stress this is the beginning of this centre, and there's quite a lot of work to do with Karl and with Nick and others to really make this an effective, responsive activity jointly with the hospital, where we utilise hospital beds to be able to have more capacity to deliver later phase trials. So Vino is, of course, going to talk about the details so far of the Queen Square Trials Centre. Staff have been appointed. They're here tonight, which is great. The other thing just to let you know about is we have worked to increase capacity, and we are about finally to open with the hospital in the ground floor of Queen Square House some additional trials capabilities. So we are increasing the capacity, and this was separate funding that we secured, separate from that 3.5 million that I mentioned. So that's a positive development in terms of capacity. Of course, I can't do a presentation without showing you the new building, and mainly because I've been working on it for 12 years. It's now going to cost, subject to council approval tomorrow, 416 million. Which is challenging, but that's what it will be. And we talk about the dual hub for translational research between the Gray's Inn Road activities and the environment there, and the continuing more clinical research environment at Queen Square. And roughly half of the 1,400 or so staff and students of the Institute will be in each location. So it's very much a dual hub. And obviously it's going to be an amazing environment for research, and there'll be outpatient activity there, as well as a major 5 MRI imaging facility for research and clinical care. So this is what we said it would look like when it was finished. This is a photo more recently, so it is definitely progressing, and we hope it will complete at the beginning of 2027. And so the dual hub is illustrated in this diagram again. So at the Gray's Inn Road end of the dual hub, we anticipate mainly laboratory, preclinical discovery research, but there will be patient services there and MRI. And at the Queen Square end will be more clinical research, and that's where obviously the Leonard Wolfson and this new activity, the Queen Square Trials Centre, will fit into this ecosystem to understand diseases and ultimately deliver therapies through trials. And it's a short walk between the two locations. So we hope that the Queen Square Trials Centre will be a key part of this ecosystem of translation, which we think will be hopefully the go-to place ultimately for all phases of neuroscience trials. The subsequent presentations are going to outline that to you in a bit more detail. So I'm going to hand over now to Chris Turner, and he's the Divisional Director at Queen Square, a key partner in this venture.
Thanks, Mike, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. It's been many years in the making, and really, this is what UCL and UCLH do really, really well, and I think that's exemplified especially at Queen Square. It's that marriage of university and hospital which really gives us our unique focus on treating the untreatable and moving forward advances in therapeutic medicine, particularly the therapeutic neurosciences. And it really is vision at its best of what we need to do for our patients, and it requires collaborative leadership. It requires putting aside differences, the pressures in the university side, the pressures in the hospital side, and bringing those together to do what's best ultimately for patients. And my own experience, personal experience, working in clinical trials has been a real journey, particularly over the past 5 years, where we've gone from having no therapeutics for myotonic dystrophy, a rare neuromuscular disorder affecting about 10,000 people in the UK, but ultimately fatal and prematurely fatal for many of those individuals, to a situation where I now have 11 trials, 4 first in human, 3 phase 3. And so that's just my corner of the world. You've all got stories similarly that you can talk about where you've started to develop advanced therapeutics and you can start delivering treatments to patients who historically, even 10 years ago, we imagined, but we couldn't anticipate that we'd be where we are now. And hence the reason for the need to develop a Queen Square Clinical Trials Centre. So the vision of the hospital really, and it's interesting that I work with Karl, and Karl's heard me tell this story many a time, is that Karl was the SHO or fellow in haematology when I was a houseman at the John Radcliffe a few moons ago. And he was incredibly diligent, incredibly clever then. But one thing I learned about working on the haematology wards was that from day one of being a houseman, every patient was put into a clinical trial. It was just normal. It was something completely different from doing the general medical take or doing the gastroenterology ward round or whatever. Every patient was really part of a research hospital, was part of a clinical trial. I remember thinking then, imagine if we could do that in neuroscience. It seemed like a dream. And of course, we're there now. Every patient who walks through the door at Queen Square, we should be thinking, how can we offer this patient a potential access to an advanced therapeutic? And so it's incredibly exciting times. And of course, there's a funding model that works with the NHS to support that, and we're going to start to harness that. And the haematologists and oncologists have been doing that for years and been very clever about it. I think it's the time for neuroscientists to be very clever about it as well. So we're really changing generationally treatments that we can offer in neuroscience. And it's a really exciting time to be a part of that transition. And the Queen Square Clinical Trials Centre will really be supporting that locally so that we have local ownership where we can, in partnership with the Research Directorate and the JRO, and being able to control local resource, local staffing, local workforce, being able to be really mobile, being really creative with our local teams in being able to support even more clinical trials. And that's what the Queen Square Clinical Trials Centre will provide. So I'm going to stop there, and it's a really proud moment for me to see this, because I'm about to go off on a 6-month secondment to King's to another job. So for this to have taken place and to have opened 3 weeks before I do move on is also very exciting for me. And so be a part of it, be engaged, and this is a really exciting time to be in neuroscience. So thank you. Thank you, Mike.
So we have next Karl Peggs. So Karl has already been introduced, but has been incredibly supportive as we've developed the trial centre. Thank you, Karl.
Thank you so much, Vino. I'm delighted to be over here. It seems that I have a shared history with many people in the room. Mary just reminded me of eons ago when we first met over a patient. Delighted to be here. Haematologist by training. Never thought I would be doing this kind of job, and never really understood what this job was, to be honest, when I took it 9 months ago. I came as director of the BRC. The excitement there was an opportunity after sort of 25, 30 years of becoming more and more subject matter expert in the tiny bit of science and haematology that I did, the chance to zoom out and say, well, what on earth has happened across medicine for the last 25 years? What are all the fantastic people across the campus doing now? And of course, it wasn't long, it didn't escape my notice that Queen Square is a huge lump of that, and neurology has changed massively in 25 years. And more excitingly, the therapeutics in the last few years. We are all part of a big family, and there are lots therefore of shared learnings. And as Chris points to, a lot of this happened in haematology a long time ago, and it's happening in oncology in increasing numbers more recently. So we have established, by trial and error, organic growth, various ways to make this work. One of my roles here, the Director of Research role, is to enable what you guys want to do here. The vision is more trials for more patients. Below that hang a bunch of other things. We want to pull through science from the university. We want this to be a friction-free area where we can actually help all the university academics to pull through trials. We want to bring in all the commercial trials. You have a great early phase network already under the auspices of Vincenzo. As I came into this, I looked across the patch, and what I saw was a big patchwork quilt. There's some failed stitching between some of those patches. There's some patches missing, to be honest. But simplistically, there is a function that the university needs to supply, which is about trial design, delivery, development for investigators. There's a function the hospitals need to supply, which is about delivery, research delivery. And there is a joining up function, which is a lot of what the JRO does. To me, when I came and looked at Queen Square and saw the evolution and the pipeline and the potential and the excitement, the question was, how do we get the right ambition for the delivery side and make delivery work? We've done it for cancer over the last 20 years. We've done it by pooling, by increasing resilience. What happened here was a catalyst under Mike et al., Mary, 3 or 4 years ago. And I think without that catalyst, maybe I wouldn't have come here with that idea. But when I came and saw the intent, my question to Vino and Chris was, well, what's the ambition? And once you tell me your ambition, which you've heard today, how do we help you deliver that? So to the point that Mike made, that this is the beginning of a journey, this is a fantastic beginning to a journey, but it's the start of something much bigger. It's the start of realising the ambition and the vision that these fine ladies and gentlemen have set out for you. So that's my bit today.
Thanks, Karl. So my part of the talk today is the practical aspects of the trial centre. So what I'm going to take you through is a bit more of what we've done and what we plan to do. So the aims, the values, the model, the team you'll get to meet today, what we've delivered so far and what the plans are and how to collaborate with us. So our aims are really to support primarily late phase clinical trials, and that's enabled by working very closely with Leonard Wolfson Centre, the CRF, and with Vincenzo's team to translate across the full pathway of trial delivery from conception in preclinical to patient delivery and NHS adoption. We want to work closely with our stakeholders, so UCL, BRC, DRC, RDN and UCLH. So we want to really pull together everyone involved in clinical trial and research delivery. And this is really sort of envisioned or realised by embedding research within NHS, and there's been a lot of support and direction from this from a national level as well. And as I've said, working alongside Leonard Wolfson, which has its own portfolio and its own remit as well to translate further studies. We have a set of values that we've come up with, and I think these are, the epitome of research across Queen Square and UCLH. So the model that we've developed is working very closely with UCL and BRC and Leonard Wolfson. So these are all of our stakeholders that will interplay with how we grow and build the Queen Square Clinical Trials Centre as well. And we've developed a set of reporting structures or governance structures through both the Research Directorate and also UCLH, and working closely with UCL and Leonard Wolfson. So our team consists of a core team of 4 people and myself, and it's a fantastic new team that have been in place since the beginning of this year. So I'm going to take you through our team members, and hopefully you'll have a chance to talk to them afterwards as well. So our senior research nurse is Margaret Duku. So she is a fantastic addition to our group. So Margaret has a wealth of experience in clinical trial research, working at UCLH in different teams, supporting the full breadth of research from setup through to delivery as well, and has experience liaising with sponsors and commercial partners as well. So Margaret will be leading particularly the setup, approvals, and the sort of operational aspects of the trial centre. Our research nurse is Yok. So Yok comes with experience in neuroscience. She's moved over from Cambridge to join our team, and she was working in the vasculitis and lupus team there, and has experience in neurology, which is very welcome in terms of dealing with our patients and communicating with our patients. And Yok really will be looking at the delivery side of things, the practical sort of hands-on IMP delivery and sort of day-to-day activities. Our research administrator is Rita Gupta. Rita, we're very lucky to have. She's a pharmacist and was lead pharmacist at UCLH Clinical Trials Department, and she's come over to join us and brings a wealth of knowledge in terms of governance and reviewing processes, etc. So we're very grateful to have Rita join our team. And then we have Asan, who is our finance management officer. And Asan also comes with experience having worked with JRO and upskilled with JRO and implemented new ways of managing finance and having transparency and oversight in terms of finance management. So Asan is a great member of our team. And Asan works also with Leonard Wolfson, and that helps us have a sort of strong connection in terms of cost sharing and management of finances as well with Leonard Wolfson. And most of you know me, but just to say that I do have a few roles that may or may not be, helpful really in terms of research delivery or trials delivery. So to take you through what we've done and what the plans are. So in the last, as Mike sort of mentioned, in the last 2 years, we've been working with Chris and JRO and Vincenzo to develop this model, and there's a practical component to the model. There's the sort of operation aspect, and then how we're going to expand this. So just to take you through, firstly, the sort of practical delivery side of things. So with our divisional team, this is the start of the beginning of sort of developing this. And so at the start, we are having 2 beds. The beds are on John Young and Maida Vale in Queen Square, and we also have 2 chairs. These will be sort of day chairs for patients that may not necessarily need infusions or have less disability, for example. And the Queen Square Clinical Trials Centre core team will support the ward nurses in the delivery of the IMP, the clinical trial, and the research team or the PI team will also support in terms of, for example, specialised outcome measures or disease-specific measures that need to be delivered to the patient. So it's a combined model with the Queen Square Clinical Trials Centre team and the PI team. And then we have, with our team, as well as working with JRO, a process for the approvals, governance, monitoring aspects of trial delivery as well. And we've also set up an oversight board to see how, to set this up and how progress develops over time. So that's a sort of practical delivery model. So over the last 2 years, we've taken a lot of steps in sort of mapping what activity happens at Queen Square to try and understand how best to deliver this. And then, as I said, we've set up the board with board meetings. We've had several work streams with division, etc., to develop the operational aspects of this, the SOPs and the ways of working. We have a website that we've also created that can be accessed. So moving then from the last 2 years of all this development, beginning this year, we started supporting trials. So we've finalised the SOPs and have established an adoption and feasibility committee with the first AFC committee happening in May. So that was very exciting. So we've now adopted 2 studies and we've supported 1 grant application, and which has been very exciting to see happen. And we've had our first patient who's had the IMP delivered now. One of the key aspects of this is integrating research within NHS care, and a part of that has been upskilling and uptraining our ward nurses to be research active, and Margaret has been pivotal in this, and with Maravik and Glenda and the ward team, we now have 11 ward nurses who are GCP trained and have upskilled in research delivery. So at present, we're supporting 2 studies that are up and running, which is very exciting for us. And I guess then where to from here? So we have a pipeline of studies that we're going to deliver this year. And I think that's sort of, we want to sort of walk before we run. And this is 5 trials in total, 3 neurology trials and 2 neurosurgical trials. And so the next AFC will be this month, where we review the other 3 studies. And the aim really is to really smoothly deliver these trials, and so we can streamline processes, streamline finances, make sure that finances are transparent, etc. And at the bottom you can see that, you know, one of the other aspects of what we will do alongside the trial delivery is data collection to understand where roadblocks may be, where improvements are required, timelines, etc., and also a sense of the demand that comes in for clinical trials as well. We'll continue to upskill workforce, more nursing staff, and increasing skills that the nursing staff have also, and also building relationships with commercial companies and also PPI groups. So that's the plan for the rest of this year. And then next year, the plan is to upscale and deliver additional trials to the five that we've pipelined for this year. And we're open to sort of discussion and approach for further trials for next year, but the plan really will be to expand to further trials from the beginning of next year. And as Karl and Chris and Mike have said, one of the big things is how are we going to upscale and grow the Queen's Court Clinical Trials Centre, and that will be a big part of what we do, working with JRO Research Directorate to figure out how to map and upscale the Queen's Court Clinical Trials Centre, because we know that demand is increasing for clinical trials in neuroscience. And really long term, we want to aim to support all late phase trials and have a localised expertise in neuroscience trials, approvals and setup processes, and become really international leaders in where to come for any neuroscience trials, and work really to translate the first-in-man trials that come through LWINC through to us. So in terms of study selection, this is a question I've been asked several times. Initially, as the studies that we've chosen to focus on or focusing on are those that come from LWINC, so the open label extensions of trials that are in LWINC now, or their late phases of first-in-man studies that have been implemented in Lind Wolfson. And then study prioritisation will move to targets or priorities that have been identified by BRC and IoN and align closely with their priorities. And we want to also ensure that we have interdisciplinary research, including interventional studies with allied health professionals as well. So in terms of collaboration or how to work with us, so we do want to hear from PIs or research teams early, and the particular reasons for that is being involved early for costing reviews and negotiations. There's opportunities to collaborate with costings, for example, and Asan has expertise in that area to review costings. So that's very important, and we have, for example, provided costings for a grant application already. And contract reviews, again, Margaret has upskilled with JRO in terms of in contract reviews and CDA reviews, so we want to streamline that process, and we can be approached to do those things for trials that will come through QSCTC in the future, or, you know, for discussion. Grant support, again, is a reason to contact us early. And you know, we want to really sort of facilitate ways of PIs coming together to sort of build co-funded posts or shared posts to support trials from a clinical perspective, for example, as well. So there's several reasons to sort of get in touch earlier rather than once sort of ethics and approvals are all done and dusted. It's also, I think, can be really helpful to try and get an understanding of feasibility and timelines with studies and the time commitment that it can take on PIs or sub-PIs and fellows. So that can be very helpful to get a sense of by talking to us first. And again, also to discuss the timing, because, you know, at the moment we have a pipeline in place, but we will be looking for studies for 2026, and then, of course, a plan to sort of expand. And you can email us on this email if you want more information or if you want to contact us. We do have a website. It's changed in the way it looks now with the sort of migration, but there is sort of a basic outline, a kind of flow chart if you're new or returning to trials about how kind of simple processes work, how things might start, and linking to JRO documents, etc. as well. And one of the things that we want to maintain is an up-to-date trials list across Queen Square, so across all the divisions and departments of Queen Square. there is a sort of way to search for trials in UCLH or via JRO as well. And this will sort of just be a list so that you can see what's happening. And the aim will be to try to put together with Chris and the division a sort of infogram to show the level of output from Queen Square for neuroscience trials. So the aim is to keep that up to date, and it is due for an update. So thank you to everyone involved. There's been lots and lots of people involved, really, in seeing this come through to fruition. So thank you, and please do contact us if you'd like to be involved.
Well, thank you very much, Vino. That was really nice to see the outline of it, and you've simplified 3 years' work into 10 minutes, which is huge. So it's an extremely exciting development, a very, very exciting development. And now we're going to open it for questions to the panel. And perhaps I can just start with maybe to Karl and Nick. So we've looked in envy and admiration at oncology and haematology for years. But when I think back to how people used to present, a lot of patients would come into hospital with their oncology, haematology, or at least have to come regularly to outpatients. So in a way, it's understandable how it evolved being incorporated into the NHS practice. And of course, we want to do that. But the basis of most neurology is outpatient based. And I think that's why we're starting with 2 beds. And you couldn't feasibly, you wouldn't imagine a clinical trial centre to be based as an inpatient facility. So one of the questions with this kind of a basis that most of our stuff is outpatient, you would envisage that you'd have to build a clinical trial, or at least there wouldn't be enough inpatient or daycare facility to incorporate all we want to do. So that was the first half of the question. And the second half, and this is me looking at Nick a bit, because every time I meet Nick, I ask him this, is, many of our diseases are really rare. So, they're rare. There might be a type of dementia or a type of neuromuscular disease. They're often rare. So there's different PIs leading on them. And I'd be really interested to see how in oncology, haematology, the PIs get time to do them. Now, BRC funded people for years. Clearly that model won't work in the long term for funding people to do research in trials. And we've all been really keen to see research incorporated into NHS contracts, particularly perhaps in NHS consultant jobs, and that could be mutually beneficial in terms of contracts. I just wondered what you both thought about that going forward. To start all the questions, the easy ones first.
That tiny question. Can you hear me? Yeah. So I think that to some degree they both touch on the same element, which is what I've come to learn over the last 9 months. Research is a business. At the moment, no one's got money. The hospitals haven't got any money. We know what they're doing with headcount numbers. The universities haven't got any money. And the only way you get research delivered is to understand the business and the business case. And that doesn't mean you don't have aspirations to bring science through, etc., but you have to understand the business. You have to understand the as is. So you have to sort of programmatically, we have to understand what you have got, and we map it against what cancer have got. We have to understand where you are going to, so the 2B, and then we have to understand the differences. So to answer to your first question, this is a very key point of what we've been thinking about, which is we know what cancer does and we know how it works. Does that immediately translate straight to neurology? And the answer is no, for the very reason that you have raised. A lot of haematology care is inpatient based, so standard of care is inpatient. So you have a phase 3 trial, your standard of care arm is inpatient, your experimental arm is inpatient. It's the same bed it's the same patient in the same bed with the same sort of model behind it, and so the numbers kind of stack up. If your primary treatment is outpatient based, now you're asking for an additional inpatient bed. So it's one of the key differences, and that's part of the question we'll be putting to the Great Task and Finish group, which is, okay, we understand what cancer is, we understand various things about what you have at Queen Square, about what the differences are, and what does that model. What we are hearing is there is a shift to more disease-modifying inpatient requiring therapies, the ISOs and antibodies, etc. So there may be a shift, but we need to understand those key differences, and they will never be exactly the same. But I think the direction of travel is in that direction. Once you begin to get the understanding and buy-in of that, it's like, well, if this is a business, who do you need to buy in? Well, you need the service delivery side of it. So you need the buy-in from the hospital, from the division, which is why we so early on came to Chris and Shrita and said, we need to join everything up here. So the simple answer to your first question is, it is very different. We understand that. And the core difference is that very thing. And it's a business question. It's about finance. And to some degree, it's about what investment you are willing to put in at risk to get something back. As part of the business, also there's a scalability thing, which is if you can scale this bigger, it's more effective and more efficient. And if you can get more trials coming in, you get more commercial income. And if you get more commercial income, you can build a bigger research delivery team, and you can consider how that supports the need for space. Even if you're outpatient space, like the CRF that we have of Vincenzo's CRF over at UCL, the cancer one, guess what? The hospital doesn't pay for that space. That has to be paid for somehow. So in broader term, that first bit is around understanding the business, the scalability, what you've got now, what you will get, and building that business case, basically a financial business case. And to answer to your second question, how is it business as usual? To some degree, the two are linked again, because if you look at the income from trials, part of that is to pay for investigator time. And if you look, for example, roughly speaking, the annual trial-related income for investigator time in cancer is about 900,000 a year. The nursing and allied is about 1.2 million a year. So if you've got that income coming in, that should pay for the PAs in the job plans. But we have to work the way to shift from where you are now to where that is, because the business case will make sense if you understand it and build it. So that would be my answer. Both of them, it's around money, business case, and getting everyone what they need. I don't know. No, he hasn't got anything to say.
Chris or Mike, do you want to comment to that? Because that is the critical thing. I think the point about it being a business is a very important point, actually, with these type of trials.
Come to the front and face the audience, you think? Or,
absolutely, whatever.
So
do you want to do that?
Maybe we should stand and face you rather than our back. So in a way, the investment we got from this grant for 3.5 million is the pump prime seed money going at risk, if you like, to build the unit to have the evidence to attract more and more sort of trials and more companies, so that then we will have a business case that we can scale up. So that's why I think we all agree it's the beginning of that journey. Had we not got that seed funding, it may have been more difficult to get this off the ground. That would be my response. But ultimately, our hope is it will be similar to cancer, and that there will be large amounts of income from the commercial trials that would pay for PAs and consultant jobs, that would cover the growing numbers of staff to run the unit. And so it is a business, as you say, but I think the source of that money is principally commercial trials.
Yeah, it's about developing an infrastructure, and that infrastructure historically at Queen Square has been, I think Karl referred to it as a patchwork quilt with some missing patches. And I think that's, without being too figurative about it, I think it is about building a collective at Queen Square where we can all be supported. So even early years consultants can say, I want to do a clinical trial in X. I've got no money. What do I do? And they can provide some money and buy some time without having to find a whole-time equivalent physio or nurse or study trials coordinator. And I think building in that collective model gives us a resilience in terms of the infrastructure to be able to deliver more trials more efficiently. And of course, that in itself, the business model, creates a self-sustaining cycle of input and investment and improved infrastructure, and makes us more attractive to outward investors. My second point is, I think we do need, and I've learnt the hard way in this, those who've worked with me on my trials, to be a lot more savvy with our industry partners, in how we negotiate what we need to deliver these trials. Because ultimately, we have the cohorts that are well defined, the patients want to come to see us, and we're primed to be able to deliver that. So I think we are in a stronger negotiating position, and clinicians and scientists don't tend to be the best business-minded people because we're too busy delivering care and delivering science. So I think we need the support of the infrastructure, in other words, business partners, to be able to, as part of that infrastructure, to be able to do those negotiations, the contracts, and be supported and be able to deliver.
I think that's a very good point, actually, because we're always trying to do things on the cheap. And for grants for UCL, we're always trying to do them on the cheap. Right, let's take questions from the audience. There's one up there first.
Love you for the question you posed. Just as an example, Matthias Kopp from the epilepsy group. I don't know whether Jenny is here. She pulled off 6 commercial trials over the last year. We have 6 commercial trials running. The problem is me. As the PI on this, I have no time to see the patients. And so I see them in between clinics, which is basically a risk flagged up in the recent audit. So we are going to nosedive in a moment if this is not changed quickly.
I mean, I think that's a really good point, and I think it's at the beginning now, isn't it? There's loads of commercial trials coming through. Epilepsy probably has had more of them for many more years. Some of us are just waking up to them, and it's that initial step of how you start it, because once you have a big group of trials coming in, it's easier to build time. So I would say, we'll ask the questions. I think two things are needed. I think clinical trials needs to get into job planning. So clinical trials is everybody's business, almost, I would say. It's whatever way you're involved, even if it's only identifying patients in clinic. I can see us all being involved in clinical trials, like presumably all haematologists and oncologists around. So one of the things is that gets talked about in our job plans, how we allow for that. Number two, I don't think we're trained for clinical trials adequately. So I think our training as, neurologists, it's incredibly poor about how to do clinical trials and how to be involved in them. And it's a basic part, I think, of what we will do with neurology going forward. So I think that's a really good point. I think it's a start at this stage. I think there are teams, and I know the neuromuscular team to a certain extent, painfully have done the first 2 or 3 trials with no help, but then just got enough money in to support a fellow or some time, and it is a painful build-up. I don't see any way around the initial pain, but I think if it's shared across it, there could be some ways of making it a bit better. But I do think it needs to get into job plan talking. And I still think, and I know Nick and I have had this conversation before, I still think that probably there needs to be some upfront admission in job plans that people should have some time to do clinical trials. And job plans have got tighter and tighter for NHS consultants. But in real life, and I'd be interested in what Karl says about haematology and oncology, it's often NHS consultants that are delivering the trials, that are commercial. Some of the academic trials are not. And I wonder how that's evolved into your typical consultant's job plan in oncology or haematology.
Yeah, I think it comes to an overall framework of how you're going to see this delivered. And that's not going to be a light switch overnight. But in answer to that, there's one way of thinking about it, which is research is separate. It's not business as usual. I need protected time and protected space, and therefore I need to write it into my job plan, and I need a PA here, and that will be my research PA. Another way of looking at it, but you have to have the larger scaled model and the business case that supports it, is, no, actually research is business as usual. We don't have, to be honest, although we all do trials, we don't have research PAs. It's just there's a clinic I go to where I see all my patients, including my trial patients. And why does that work? Well, there's a massive cancer Queen Square CTC, but much bigger thing, a CTTU, that is where we're trying to get to, where all those trial-related people, the trial nurses, the CTPs in our case, data managers, they all come to the clinic. So now you've got a model where there isn't protected time in that way, but there's a recirculation of those large sums of money, a divisional buy-in that says that's fine, we've got the money, it's paying for the time, we don't actually have to part it out 1 PA or half PA at a time. And those clinical trial patients will be seen as business as usual in a model that works, and not as a separate research is something different. And that shifts the viewpoint of the clinicians and the nurses, and you no longer have a situation where we've gone and trained 11 nurses. That's great, because that's where we need to start from. But it's like every nurse is now research active because it's business as usual. Now, if that's the 2B, the big question is, how do you go from as is to B? And that's where we're trying to build the team to try and get the milestones and progression to there. But I see that as a better model, where it's business as usual, built in. Everyone's brought into it because the hospital understands the money's coming and it's all being recirculated, and it is not positioned as an add-on adjunct, sits astride. If you want to go that way, you have to justify every bit of space you use, every bit of time you use, and that's not the best way forward in my view.
That's very interesting, because also it would actually increase capacity for the hospital as well to do their normal work if it's done cleverly. Other questions? We've one up here. Sorry, I can't see who it is, but there's 2 there.
Just a practical question when before approaching. Do you have plans longer term for other expert involvement, statisticians, health economists, etc., or will you be outsourcing to other groups like the research support services or people across UCL?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we've had lots of people approach us about sort of trial design support to that, sort of trial analysis support. So I think, part of upscaling is sitting and identifying which roles we need and the order of which we need them. And I think, sort of data manager for data entry is, that's probably sort of a high priority, and then a sort of clinical fellow to support who, perhaps cross-trains in epilepsy or, develops some expertise in some disease areas, and then, a statistician. So these are sort of key roles that we need to think about when we're upscaling, absolutely.
Next question, there was one down here.
Could I just quickly answer that as well? I think, to me, I kind of simplify things. These are very, very important things to get right, and the model here doesn't have to be the same as models elsewhere. But to simplify things in my mind, there are various elements around the front-end clinical trial design, and that at the moment is a function that sits more in the university with the clinical trial units that help with the statistics, the planning, the data analysis plan, the regulatory approvals. What I see this mainly as, but it can evolve with thought, this is the delivery piece. So this is when you've done all of that and got your trial through, this means that you don't have to worry about how the heck you deliver it and get the data in. So that, to me, that's what this is more about. But as I say, it doesn't have to be like that at the end, but that's my start point.
Question up here.
Hello. I have another question about research delivery. I work with Matthias. So we're currently working with the LWENC. We have another commercial sponsor that wants to work with us. We have approached LWENC, but they have correctly pointed out they're more of a phase 1 trial centre. So I understand that your timeline is already set for this year. Are you taking on trials for clinic space only? Because that's how we work with LWENC for this year. So we have a team of nurses and
yeah, absolutely. So we do have a pipeline for this year, and so we have to deliver those and make sure we streamline processes. But absolutely, long term, there are definitely trials that we can support as well if they are sort of outpatient based delivery trials. That's
but
fine.
for this year, would you?
So you can send us an email. We can discuss, but we really have this pipeline set for this year, and I think it's really important that we do that well, and iron out everything that needs to be ironed out, etc., before we sort of expand rapidly. But you're very welcome to email us, and we can see what we can do to support.
It's very impressive you've 2 neurosurgery as well as neurology going. I mean, that's impressive. It's not that I'm looking at neurosurgery, but it's excellent that there's both involved actually from the beginning. So there's 2 questions, one up here from Michael on and then Nick Ward.
It's really, really great to see this developing. It's so exciting, and I'm very happy to go with the analogy of the quilt and sort of see the extra bits of the quilt being sewn in. But with the nurses are really key to develop to delivering many of the trials, and it's really great to see we've got lots of nurses GMP trained in the haematology studies and oncology studies. Many of them are chemotherapy trialed because they're trained because they're delivering chemotherapy, whereas there's a huge range, of course, of new neuroscience drugs, from the intrathecal drugs to something more benign, perhaps. Did the nurses, will they all be trained across the board to deliver all of the therapies that, or is that what is one of the limitations of what you can take on as trials? Obviously, more nurses will end up having more skills because, of course, you need 2 nurses and some covers for every trial, for the blinded one and the unblinded one and everything else. How will you cover the nursing trained aspects?
That's a really good question. So the nurses that have been upskilled on the wards at the moment can do infusions. So one of, including chemotherapy, etc., that we're going to be upskilling. But one of the limitations is intrathecal administration. So that is on our plan to kind of develop how we're going to do that and a process for that. But that is one limitation. But in terms of sort of infusions, etc., we can do that.
Okay. So Vincenzo comment and then we'll have Nick's.
Well, I can comment on that, on the intrathecal aspect. There is also an element of innovation relative to the past in terms of how we train the new generation of IT doctors. So historically, we relied on the training within the hematology department. So for oncology training, for chemotherapy to be administered intrathecally. Because clearly of issues of capacity, they can continue training everyone. And also the intrathecal administration of IMPs for neurology, neurodegeneration doesn't require that level of, there is not the same level of toxicity as for chemotherapy. So to cut the long story short, we are now have developed a new process where the training of doctors will be locally, here at Queen Square. So there will not be dependence anymore from the hematology team. And so we have started already developing, starting training new doctors. And so that will increase the capacity. The actual administration itself is in a way the least of the problems, because all the IT administrations are now done within the Wolfson, but really what you need is a space. And that space needs to have the right ventilation, the right safe QA aspects, but the space itself within the hospital wouldn't be a problem. What we need is to train people. So the goal is really, and this is what I think is the most exciting element of the Clinical Trials Centre and the bigger picture, as Karl was highlighting, the Clinical Trial Delivery Unit, really to have a concept of continuity for compounds that progress through the pipeline. Within the Wolfson, we have, and within the CRF more in general, and Nick and I have discussed so many times over the years, there's always been the issue that PI came to, and sponsor came to us to say, can we do more late-phase clinical trials? Can we do open-label extension of the trials that started already within the CRF? And that becomes more and more challenging, because the open-label extension can be for 3 years, 4 years. So the bottom line is that what we are trying to deliver here is a model of continuity through the pipeline, which could be potentially, hopefully, a role model also for other therapeutic areas, where historically there has been often a dichotomy between what is early phase and late phase, but without really connection between the two. So we are trying really to deliver a model that sponsors are coming more and more toward the CRF for early phase clinical trials. Then they're asking us, can we do the open label extension? Can we do more late phase clinical trials? And so really the goal is not really just to think about the trial, but also to create the infrastructure, the expertise, the skills of individuals, including the element of the IT administration that can be delivered within the Wolfson, but also within the hospital in due course. Clearly, we are at the early stages, 2 studies, but the goal in that diagram that you have shown is really to upscale as we move on.
Thank you, Vincenzo. That's very helpful. Nick?
I mean, firstly, just to say that it's how exciting it is to have this clinical trial centre. I mean, it's absolutely what we've needed over the years. I'm going to ask the question that I thought Gita was going to ask, and say that we're interested in different types of interventions, so non-pharmacological behavioural interventions, for example. And I think people underestimate just how much potential there is for doing this kind of clinical trial work, not just in the things that I'm interested in, like stroke and brain injury, but in neuromuscular and neurodegeneration. And I can see and I understand why it's not in the first iteration of this centre. But the question is, how far up your to-do list is it to get the infrastructure to be able to support these kinds of trials?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very difficult question. I mean, I think, so we definitely want to support interventional trials that are, behavioural, allied health, etc. And also, think about how we can partner with community providers, etc. I think one of the big limitations is space, which, is something that we're going to have to think about. And in the upscale, we're going to have to think about how we approach that. And that's one of the major limitations that we've seen talking to our allied health colleagues, etc., as, gym space for the equipment, etc., is a major limitation, an issue at the moment. So we definitely want to support. I think we have the infrastructure to support the approval, set up, etc., all of the sort of governance processes, but the space remains a challenge in terms of a sort of, gym space, really, or, vestibular space, etc.
It's certainly worth thinking creatively. So I think a gym doesn't have to be a gym. It can be a lab space, for example. I mean, we've just finished a clinical trial where patients were coming in for 8 hours a day of training for 3 weeks. So we did that in the labs, and the equipment is there. So it's possible to do it in other spaces,
But so I guess infrastructure goes more broadly than just the space.
It sounds like integration as well, doesn't it? Integrating it into normal, be it at a university. Mike?
Yeah, just to make the point, from my perspective, we want to know from you what are the opportunities. So I think it would be madness if we were not trying to set up to do trials that were allied healthcare interventions or physical interventions or non-drug interventions. But in this next phase of this task and finish group, where we're trying to understand how we're going to scale up, part of that will be about money. And so it's like understanding, okay, what's the opportunity in terms of companies or industry that are interested in that type of intervention? Because that's how I think we're going to be able to make it happen. But the principle is completely agreed. And so, you can join the task and finish group and input, because we wouldn't want to miss an opportunity. I mean, one of the really annoying things has been, like many of you have told us in the last few years, we feel like we're missing opportunities all the time because we can't respond. But we've got to start, and then we've got to find what the mechanism is going to be that's reliable to scale up. Because I don't think there's any reason ultimately why we can't be close to cancer, because it's now the beginning of this era of disease-modifying therapies, which include interventions and intensive speech therapy and all these things. So I think you should join the group.
But I think that's really important, because when we looked at this 4 or 5 years ago, because we knew we didn't have capacity, but until we looked at the problem and people said, this is what the problem is, this is the number of things we can't do. So if you don't pinpoint what it is, it's very difficult to deliver on that. Mike, do you think we could have, is there room for a master's in clinical trial training? I think one of the issues, the education thing has come out really strongly here, so I think we probably should think parallel to actually the training. It may be an opportunity for a new master's in neurosciences clinical trial, delivery.
You could lead it.
I could, but I could think of people who'd be much better. Chris, we're coming to the end, but Chris.
So I was going to add that in the disease that I look after, myocardial dystrophy, the most effective treatment, I think it will change in the next 5 years, is psychological support and physio-supported exercise programs in myocardial dystrophy. That is the single, and that's been proven in a clinical trial. The challenges, of course, is getting funding for that. And I think that's back to the resilience and collective ideas again, that if we do build in resilience and collective, and we're savvy with our industrial partners, I think there will be opportunities within this to sponsor trials which perhaps don't garner as much industry support. So I think that is the way forward. The second point is that actually going forward, almost certainly a lot of our therapeutics are going to need non-pharmaceutical additional support in addition to recover function, in addition to that pharmaceutical intervention. And I think that will become apparent after this first wave of pharmaceutical intervention, and everyone's getting excited by all the results we see. We'll realise that actually to maintain that or to improve that, there's probably going to need to be some non-pharmaceutical parallel intervention at the same time. So don't lose hope, Nick, and we do want to hear about all these non-pharmaceutical trials as well.
And I think, just to finish, the other thing is, I think if you're rewriting our histories, which we always do, people would, Vincenzo made the point, we've started off with diseases, we've evolved into a really fantastic phase 1, mainly developing. We're now getting to the later phases. But of course, down the line, and it is already happening, it's delivery of these therapies. So my practice in TTR amyloid is revolutionised because everyone's alive. And now it's all about diagnosing so early that you have no deficit. So it completely changes our practice, and the delivery will be very integrated to the trials of how we give all these therapies. So when somebody's retelling the story in 10 years' time, it'll even sound smoother again. But just to thank everyone to come today, and I think probably we've probably done at this stage. Thank you very much to everyone for coming. To the team. Thanks to the team to setting it all up, and for Vino, who's done a phenomenal amount of work in the last couple of years since she was appointed to set all of this up. And please welcome outside for refreshments and further conversations. Thank you.